If everyone's ready, we'll get going. We've got pretty much a full house, and I think everyone's seated. We're due to start any moment now. What I will do quickly is just introduce our 6 young panelists here. And from what I gather, we'll be able to have quite a good interactive debate on some of the key issues. I always say it's good because we'll have a chance to hear some views about the problems of the world without the baggage that's incumbent upon those of us who've passed a few more years on this planet. Let me introduce who we have very quickly. We have from Malawi, James Chatepa. I hope I said it correctly. Forgive me if I get these pronunciations wrong. I'm trying to be good with those. Omgor from the USA is with us, originally Indian. He's there. Mehran Karim is from Pakistan, so we have India and Pakistan actually peacefully sitting next to each other in these tense times. Sarah Nkoma is from Malawi as well, here on my left. Charlie Young from the UK. And Elsabi Van Vuren. You say that? From Namibia. Yeah. First, we'll kick off with a video, which sets off the panel. So if we could roll the video, please.
I'm 19 years old.
I'm from England and I'm 16 years old.
Davos, and I'm from Serbia.
From Malawi.
I come from Canada and I am 17 years old.
From Iraq and I'm 17 years old.
If we want to live in a better place peacefully, if we want to give everybody their rights, we have to change.
I saw that there was a problem and there was an issue which needed to be addressed. And I thought that if nobody else does it, why not me?
We see the world from a completely different lens, and we really like it when people take into consideration what we have to say.
Being here today proves that young people are not apathetic and that young people do care about their issues in their community.
If we work together as leaders, as young leaders and as older leaders, we really can make a difference in this world.
It is absolutely essential for young changemakers who are coming up to be the future leaders to make a strong stance.
We're active, so there's no excuse why you shouldn't be active, and you shouldn't be helping us to change the world for the future generation.
What are you going to do? We're not the leaders yet, but in time to come we will be the leaders, and they will ask us, how do you think about the future? That would be the question. Yeah,
Together, we started on a journey that will change our lives.
Bad environment.
No, I think we don't have to
focus on the good.
We work constantly, sharing our stories, our ideas, and our experiences.
And we'll therefore be able to present those issues to whoever will be listening at the Economic Forum. So we thought that would be useful.
We found within ourselves the potential that we have to shape the world, our world.
Yeah, and I'm doing phonetics and phonology.
Our voices matter. How we use them matters even more.
It's time to talk.
The knowledge for life.
वक्त आ गया बोलने के लिए. This time to praat. Tawi afika kutiti yankulani.
It's time to talk.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, of course, the advantage, as I said as we kicked off earlier on, was that this is a chance for young voices to be heard at a very important gathering. I'm just going to check here. Do we have... Are you joining us, by any chance? Mrs. Robinson, Mary Robinson, the 7th President of Ireland, I think might be joining us for a while here. Good to have you here. I know. It was Riyadh 3-4 days ago. Now, one of the things I say about young people, and you will have heard this before, is that young people generally... well, children are born essentially without prejudice, and I think the prejudices and the difficulties they face are often taught to them. And I illustrate that with a story which, unfortunately, you have heard, but I will repeat it, of a teacher with these young students who had come back after an afternoon break, a recess. And she said, look, now we've come back after our break, let's do some spelling. And she picked one of the children and said, Michael, what did you do during the break? And this young boy said, well, I played in the sandbox, miss, with Catherine. It was so much fun. It was great. So, well, Michael, if you can spell sand, you can have a cookie. So he confidently says, S-A-N-D, miss. She goes, very good, you get a cookie. Catherine, so you were in the sandbox with Michael. What was that like? Was it fun? Yes, miss, we built sandcastles and it was great. Well, if you can spell box, and it's a little tricky, you can have a cookie. So Catherine, a little nervously, says, B-O-X, miss? She goes, well done, Catherine, you get a cookie. Mohammed, were you playing in the sandbox with Michael and Catherine? And Mohammed says, no, I wanted to, but they kept me out and they called me names and threw sand at me. She says, Mohammed, that sounds like blatant racial discrimination. If you can spell blatant racial discrimination. And the trouble is that I think children end up discovering these prejudices through the eyes of adults in many cases. Now, I always tell, there's a little story I always tell to show how children can think a little more laterally and how it can illustrate how much we can learn from them. There was a story of a man whose young daughter was pestering him while he was trying to get some things done at home. And so to keep her busy, he tore a page out of a magazine which had a map of the world on it. And he thought, look, I'll cut it up into a jigsaw puzzle. She's very young. It'll take her an hour or so to put this together. So he cut the picture of the map of the world up and he said, go and put this together. And after 5 minutes, she came back into his office and handed him this thing all taped up. He said, impossible. How did you put together a map of the world in such a short time? And the little girl said, well, on the back, actually, there was a man's face. And I put the face together. And so she found it much easier knowing where the eyes, nose and mouth and so on are. And the moral of that story is, if the man is right, his world will be right. And children can think a little more differently from adults who spend their whole time trying to fix the world. And often if you look inward a little more, there's more of a solution there. What I'm hoping now is with our young panelists here to get some fresh thoughts on some of the issues we face around the world. I'm going to ask each one just for a minute or so to tell us about their background, the issues that face them in their countries, the issues that they're facing, the projects they're involved with, and how they ended up at Davos. So, James, if I could start with you, James Chatepa from Malawi.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. By the time this panel discussion is over, 50 young children in Malawi will be orphans because their parents will die of AIDS. With this kind of background in Malawi, I feel that HIV and AIDS is a disastrous problem in Malawi that needs to be tackled. And so, in my own community, I go out into the poorest of communities, and I work with underprivileged people living with HIV and AIDS, and encourage them through sports, by means of a football tournament for the boys and netball tournament for the girls, to become more active in their communities and seek out more information on the HIV crisis, empowering them to move towards a Malawi that's HIV-free and can therefore develop. Hi, I'm James. I'm 16 years old, and I'm from Malawi.
James, thank you. Gore is actually from the USA, and obviously we hear about the USA a lot in the news, but in terms of what you see the key problems there being, how you're involved in any solutions, and what how you ended up at Davos, let us know.
What I'm mostly work in is the general umbrella would be giving juveniles opportunities they might not otherwise have. In high school, this took the form of working with juvenile criminals, working with them to find sentences that were creative and rehabilitative rather than just throwing them in a juvenile hall for a while, which scientifically doesn't actually work, just makes them upset at the court system. Currently, in college, I've been engaged in a new project based on the financial crisis, so a current problem, to make sure that students who might not be able to get loans or financial aid from the school based on the fact that not everyone has a lot of money these days can compete for scholarships and other aid that I'm trying to set up with several people I've met here at Davos and also individuals I've met back home. I got here, like everyone, because we are global changemakers. We see something wrong with the world in whatever country or whatever locale we're in, and we try and fix it. And as you saw in the video, we've just come from a week in Guildford in the United Kingdom where you saw the video. There's not just we six who care about the world. You saw in that video many, many, many faces of everyone who's engaged in their community and wants to make a difference.
Thank you very much. Miran Karim is from Pakistan. Miran? Yeah. Turbulent times in Pakistan.
Well, Pakistan is actually 4 hours ahead right now. So, but in my country, being apolitical is a luxury, really. Because when you live in a country where there is so much inbred justice, you really need to come out and work, and that too from a young age. I have been part of the lawyers' movement in my country, which is to get an independent judiciary, because I believe that justice is one of the most important pillars of a society. I've also established a youth parliament in my school, where we give young people an opportunity to sit in parliament and think from their perspective of politicians. And I also work with women's rights in Pakistan, because every 1 minute, one woman is raped in Pakistan. And I do not want to be part of a generation where I, being a woman, is looked down upon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah Nkoma from Malawi.
Hello, my name is Sarah Nkoma. Excuse my voice, I have a flu. I'm from Malawi and I'm 19 years old. I work with youths, not only youths that are HIV positive, but also youths that are determined to not become HIV positive. In my university, 1 out of 3 students graduate HIV positive, and there is only a student population of 1,200. So you can imagine that these are the people we depend on to develop Malawi, and these are the people who are going to graduate HIV positive, and they may never even find out. So this is a problem that is right at our doorsteps as Malawians and as citizens of this planet we call Earth. I have members of my immediate family that are HIV positive, and it is my responsibility to ensure that I use the means that I have available to me, the resources, to ensure that we make an HIV-free generation. I use entertainment as a medium in order to communicate these messages to the youth in my society in a way that is understandable to them, in a way that they can relate the issues of HIV to them as an individual.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Charlie Young from the UK.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm from London. I campaign on climate change. I see climate change as the biggest threat facing our planet at the moment, and I'm working to try and get youth to Copenhagen, which was potentially the biggest and most important legislation that we've seen in the history of our planet and our civilization, because I think what the decisions that we make in Copenhagen will potentially decide how we deal with climate change. Climate change affects everything. It will fundamentally change the way we live, and I think there are people in positions of power who would like to act on climate change in the ways that we are needed. And what I do is I try and, through education on climate change, make it possible for the leaders to make these decisions without losing too many votes, without losing too many customers. So I'm trying to get people to Copenhagen to change legislation and lobby groups, but also bring those people back home, educate within schools so that that can go into the wider community, back to their parents, working with the media. And I think I found out about the science of climate change. That's what got me involved, just a few facts from some people that I respected. And I think if that was across the board, possibly in the national curriculum, I think that could have dramatic effects and make it possible for us to tackle climate change in the way that we need to if we want to live on this planet sustainably.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Sabi, am I saying it correctly?
Yes, that's fine. I'm probably not solving the keynote problems. If I did that, I would be the president. But I focus on mobilizing other young people to be activists in the way that I do. At this moment, I'm focusing on orphans with HIV and AIDS, and created by the results of HIV and AIDS. So I mobilize young people from my school to move into the orphan community and to serve those orphans, helping them with homework, playing games, and doing activities to stimulate them, to help them to become adults.
Thank you very much. At this stage, what I'd like to do is we're very honoured to have President Mary Robinson from Ireland joining us as our... I'm going to ask you actually to take the seat here. We'll swap the names over. Are you sure? Because I find it easier to look onto the students to do the questioning. Would that be easier?
Okay.
Just makes it easier. Are we on? Are we on? Good. It just makes it easier for me to be able to look across and see everyone. I felt I was like doing a tennis game, going backwards and forwards there. Thank you. So now we've heard from each of the young people what they're involved in, very diverse range of areas of coverage, and of course ones that concern them in their own countries. Mary Robinson, if I could, having heard these 6 people, your take on the issues that concern them, just a little bit on what you think from what you've heard so far.
Well, first of all, I'm really glad to be able to listen to very thoughtful young people who surprise us always by being much more seriously engaged than we, from an adult perspective, think. We underestimate young people. We do it constantly, and we don't involve them, we don't engage them, and we patronize them. And these are young people who can tell us a lot. I'm here actually in the place of Kofi Annan, but Kofi and I are both elders. He's a real elder. I'm a kind of surprised to be designated an elder. But one of the things that Nelson Mandela said to us was listen to young people. And actually, we've only begun to understand the wisdom of really listening, really listening. Each of these young people, as we've heard, is an actor for change. And they have lots of ideas about the 21st century. And with the challenges that we're all facing, we need to institutionalize listening to young people. I think in most of the fora, and I mean at a very serious level, financial institutions, etc., we need to have, people don't like the word quota, but some institutional capacity to really listen to young people. Because, first of all, their horizon is the long term, and they are thinking in the way the world should be thinking, but politicians don't. They think very short term. And secondly, they are experiencing, and they are really linking. I mean, I noted the emphasis on the issue of HIV, but I also noticed climate change. I mean, I would encourage you, Charlie, to think not just of climate change, but climate justice. Yeah. It's not a natural phenomenon. How does your generation get us to think in terms of the justice dimension, the transfer of technologies, the understanding of the importance of indigenous knowledge about climate change? You know, you spoke in Malawi about a generation of university students. There's also the professionals, for healthcare in Malawi. How do we stop the drain out of professionals? These are the issues that you know so well. So, my sense is that this is an opportunity for us in a context where we're challenged in a particular way, and we need 21st century solutions. Young people will give us more thinking about those 21st century solutions, I think, than anyone. So I'm really very happy to participate and to listen more, but really to say, take these young people as seriously as they take themselves, because they really do have very good ideas, and we need those ideas.
And a quick thought, ma'am, do you think you can persuade your peers, those who are in sort of senior positions like yourself, to also be as open-minded about young voices?
I think we're only beginning. I do know some people, and I know one friend of mine who happens to head the YWCA, the Young Women's worldwide, and she decided before she ended her time as head of the YWCA that for every meeting they held, 25% of those participating would be below 25 and below. It took a lot of working. So if we're going to change, and if we're going to really involve young people, it's not going to come because we say the words. We have to institutionalize it. We have to involve it. Why should we do this? Because the world has never experienced what we're going to experience. We're going to experience moving from 6.7 million to at least 9 million by 2050. The world has never done this before. We're going to be younger, more divided if we are not careful, more challenged. So, I would invite you young people, because you represent, as you said, many others, insist on being institutionalized, not just the few, the privileged, but that young people collectively have their voice heard. Otherwise, we won't move forward strategically long-term in the way we need to.
Well, let's touch on with each of our young global changemakers on what they feel are the biggest problems facing the world today. I mean, we've heard what you directly in your own countries are involved with and what you see as problems, but in the same way you were saying that, James, that you deal with HIV in Malawi. Yes. At a global level, what do you see as the key problems that the world should be tackling?
On a global level, I still think that, the HIV crisis in Malawi and the rest of Africa as a whole is devastating, really, because if that's not tackled, then what it means is that Africa will continue to have a generation that is HIV positive, that cannot contribute, contribute to the working force of their respective countries. And when this happens, you get a situation where, where the country will not develop. In fact, the development goes down, and you get a widening of the poverty gap. right? The richer countries get richer, whereas the poorer countries get poor. You know, unless you have a healthy working force, nothing can happen.
Do you get the sense that the HIV issue has fallen off the global radar in a way because issues such as security, terrorism, and so on, the war on terror, have taken over?
Definitely. I mean, in Malawi, for example, the number of people who are becoming HIV positive, the numbers increase each year by tens of thousands. You know, it's definitely fallen off the global agenda because with issues such as climate change and now the global financial crisis, the eyes of the world leaders are turning to primarily the financial crisis and then climate change.
How important is the resolution of the financial crisis in your eyes? Is it one of the key problems that the world should be tackling, or something else?
Well, James certainly touched on a very important aspect of it, in that the financial crisis is significant in both ways that I mentioned, that people just don't have as much wealth as they do, and certain individuals, such as the work I do with college students, can't afford certain things that I feel they deserve based on what they've accomplished. The other major problem is that with the economic crisis, there's a risk that world leaders, as I think is happening in the United States, are preoccupied with the financial crisis. Of course they should do something, but I feel like President Obama is focusing on the financial crisis, focusing on pushing through his legislation, along with spending the other $350 billion he has in TARP funds, at the expense of crises like AIDS, HIV in Africa, at the expense of crises like the global climate change, which are extremely relevant right now, but are also falling off the radar in some ways because people are more focused on how to get money back into the economy, how to get credit flowing again.
Miran, in terms of what you consider a priority, of course, security in your part of the world is a major issue. Pakistan gets a lot of pressure for trying to resolve its own issues as well as what it might risk for the rest of the world in the region. What do you see as a priority, and how much does it factor into some of the work you do?
Well, for me, good governance is something that's certainly needed in Pakistan, because I believe for a country that has more than 30 decades of military dictatorship, even when we do have a civilian government right now, it is very inexperienced and those structures are not strong. That is why establishing a youth parliament, for example, tries to engage people to understand why democracy is important, because I believe that, for Charlie to come from the United Kingdom, he's able to do his work because he knows he has certain support system. We need people to understand that if you want to deal with issues such as women's rights, we need to do our work, but governments need to show political will. And that political will comes when we have a good framework of good justice, social economic justice, that shows in our democratic structures.
I wonder, Sarah, if you, giving a perspective from Malawi, whether you think that the globalization, the way the planet is globalized, supposed to be more interconnected, has actually been a fair, equitable globalization, or is there a greater divide between the haves and have-nots in this world? Do you see countries, for example, is Malawi part of the global growth, or is it left out in any way?
I think it's left out in numerous ways. For instance, we're left out in terms of communication. Most of the population of Malawi lives in the rural areas. They do not have access to telephones, to the internet, and so globalization sidelines people who are, concentrated in the rural areas because they simply do not have access to instruments of globalization. Also, Malawi is a less developed country, and globalization benefits mostly, in my perspective, the more developed countries. But countries who have less resources and less to contribute to the globalization process, such as Malawi, are sidelined because they simply cannot contribute.
Charlie, if I can touch on your issue of climate change, of course, that is a global concern, but many see it as a developing world issue because those in the as a developed world issue, because those in the developing world are often concerned about their economic growth in the first instance, and issues such as climate change come secondary to that. To what extent do you see a need for a greater awareness across the globe with the issue, and do you feel it is the priority when it comes to world affairs right now?
Personally, I think it is the biggest issue facing our planet. It will fundamentally change the way we live, and it will be across the globe. Those in developing countries will be the ones who suffer most, and it's a huge injustice because they're the ones who are least responsible for the problem. I think because of that we need international collaboration, and we also need the most developed countries to acknowledge their responsibility, not only now, because most developed countries are still responsible for most of the emissions, but historically it's hugely disproportionate. And I think we should stop competing and stop pointing fingers and saying, I won't do anything until you will, because the window of opportunity for us to act on climate change is closing. And unless we work together, I don't quite see how we can solve this problem.
Just in your interactions with people of different ages, different generations, in trying to promote your agenda, to what extent do you find younger people are more open-minded to the idea of doing something positive to alter the course of climate change?
I think people like the idea that they have the direct personal impact on their own carbon footprint, and if you can see definite gains when you cut your own personal carbon footprint. Kofi Annan said that the benefits of acting on climate change aren't seen because they come in the form of disasters that don't happen. So that can make it quite hard to get people to act on climate change. But children and young people in particular are very open to education, and once you tell them the facts, tell them the figures, and how on the ground they can change and influence their parents and those who are voting, I think, you know, as long as the education and the information is there, people are definitely willing to act.
And Sabi, what concerns you when it comes to world affairs? What do you see as a priority? You're mobilizing young people. What are you telling them they should be focused on?
Well, on a global scale, I think the world is definitely looking at leaders. And we need leaders who lead in integrity. If we don't have people who lead in integrity, and especially if you talk about globalization, the responsibility just gets so much bigger, because you're not just dealing with one country's population, you're dealing with an entire planet. The second thing that I really think is important for us as a globe is relationships. I think we could really learn how to have better relationships with one another, and how to hold those good relationships, how to promote better relationships. And yeah, I think thirdly, if I have to think about the globe, I think innovation is really great. I think we need more individual innovation. Individuals should learn how to innovate on their own. And we shouldn't just look for example, a country like Namibia shouldn't just look for the West for solutions. We should learn how to innovate on our own and get our own solutions for our problems.
Yeah. Just a quick thought on your work with orphans. You're working a lot with orphans as well. Of course, the least fortunate are young people who are probably the most dispossessed and least empowered. How do you motivate them, make them feel that they have a voice?
Well, I think the best way to motivate children like those are we tell them that they have a future, because they do. And the important thing is to help them feel part of a family. I sort of have a family with them, and we all form part of one family. And once we realize that we're Namibian citizens, we're part of a global village in the end, then we start talking more about problems, and we start having hope. Because once you find a place in the world, you're ready to take a place in the world.
I'll bring Mary Robinson back in at this point and again review what the young people have said. I have to say I'm struck with how lucid they are when it comes to understanding our world's problems, and how articulate and motivated and motivating these conversations or these comments have been.
And it bears out what I was saying. We do underestimate. You know, when you listen. What I would say, I think, is to young people, the 21st century has to be a century when your voice is heard. So not only do you need to be articulate, which each of you have been, you need to be actually very determined, and to a certain extent, justifiably, a bit angry, because you know, you're not being listened to. You really aren't. You're not there institutionally. You're not there. You're there, the six of you, because you know you have been chosen to represent a lot of others. Don't lose the opportunity. You know, make sure while you're here that your voice really resonates. The youth unemployment in the world today is shocking. You know, in many of your countries, in Malawi, in South Africa, even in the UK, youth unemployment is bad and getting worse. And yet, we need a new paradigm where we recognize that work is part of identity, is part of who I am. And for young people, if you don't have access to the possibilities of developing your potential, it's harder to say who you are in the world. So not only, you know, should you be articulate about the situation, but I think be determined that young voices have to really tell us. I suppose I come back again to the climate justice, because I know that Kofi Annan is chair of the Global Humanitarian Forum, and I'm on the board. And what we're trying to do in the run-up to Copenhagen is have an alliance for climate justice, that climate change is already affecting the countries that most of these young people are from, but it's not a natural phenomenon. It's caused. How do we work on justice in a 21st century way? One of the ways is to have transfer of the new technologies. Young people understand these new technologies much more than my generation. How do you see a justice of transferring those technologies, solar, wind power, biomass, all of the, to change the poverty structure? Not to just comment on the world as it is, but change it. You're the change agents. I'd like to hear, some more proactively change agent voices from you.
I have to say, I'll get to you in just a second actually, James, because I have to say, I wish all 6 of you were international journalists with a big voice in the world, because in all the crises of the world, the important factors, no one said security, war on terror, Islamic threat, and all the stuff that we hear most of the time. I mean, these were like substantial issues, substantive issues that really can make a difference all round, with no real scaremongering in the sense of what we hear in the media most of the time. James, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that we are angry that we're patronized and we're not taken seriously, but of course we can't express too much anger, otherwise we'll get kicked out.
But push it a bit,
the thing is, I agree with you completely in the fact that, what we do is we don't just try to talk and talk. In our own communities, we're there, we're on the ground, and we're doing the best we can to improve the situation we see in front of us.
And we were looking actually for suggestions from you to these key issues. If you had a suggestion, if you had a voice that might actually result in some action, as opposed to now just being heard and perhaps people chewing it over, if you could actually change something, what would the suggestion be to a world leader or to the world community?
If I could change something in the world community, you mean?
Yeah, if you could do something that would create change in the areas you're concerned about.
That's actually a very good question, but
what's a solution? What would you offer as a solution?
As a solution, once again, dialogue, although is not, the absolute way forward, is extremely important. We need to be involved in the sense that we need to be listened to, we need to be heard, How can you run a government where over half the population is below the age of, 24, 25, yet you don't listen to any of those people? It's ridiculous. We need to be heard. We need to be not necessarily consulted in decision making, because surely we're not, we're not qualified enough to do that. But nonetheless, we need to be heard when it comes to decision making.
Good point. And why not? Why not be consulted? I'll get you in a second, Don. But Charlie, you wanted to.
I just wanted to say, on a global level, I think we need to start seeing environmental limits, scientific limits, as what they are, which are limits rather than recommendations and just another lobby group that we can live within. If we want to look on a really practical level, when it comes to climate change in Copenhagen, I think we need to change the structure of the Kyoto Protocol, because at the moment there are just too many ways to duck out of cutting your carbon emissions. And if we charged for taking carbon dioxide, for taking fossil fuels out of the ground, and put that into a technology fund, so to fund technology transfer to less developed countries and into to level out the climate injustice, I think that would be an effective way to move forward.
Could I just ask Charlie?
Yeah.
How do you see yourself in 2050?
Realistically, or how I'd like to see myself?
but
he's going to be a diplomat.
I asked the question because that's real for you.
Yeah.
That's a real question.
Yeah.
And in 2050, it's the kind of crunch time from a climate change point of view. Yeah. So how do you see it?
I would like it to be that we've got this fund started up and there's enough money to transfer enough technology. I'd like to see a planet where we thought about the environment and thought about our economy within the environment rather than as a subset of the economy. I'd like to see people thinking about their environmental impact and getting our energy from new sources, clean sources, and people being informed about environmental impact and all the issues across the world, so that they can make conscious decisions when they're voting, when they're buying products, when they're doing anything.
You had your hand up a moment ago. I'll get you in a second, James.
Well, I like what Charlie said, and to expand on it, I think what I would like to happen is for world leaders to... Well, let me rephrase it. I said earlier that we're global change makers. We see something wrong and we fix it. But that's not limited to youth. That shouldn't be limited to 60 or even 6 youth sitting here who decide to fix something. That should be a concern of the people in power, of the older generation who have power currently. And in doing so, in trying to fix whatever problem there is, whether be it climate change, be it justice, be it the economic crisis, be it AIDS, be it education, I would really like politicians to stop acting like politicians, to look at a crisis and think of a long-term viable solution rather than a quick fix that makes them look good in the short term, and in my country helps their political party get forward. I don't want to attack any recently stepped down presidents, but we've had well, maybe I will, but we've had so much legislation passed in the last several years that's very politically motivated, sounds great, but in reality is awful, and it's used only to make a political point rather than actually change the world in a positive way. And so I'd really hope that politicians stop acting like politicians and start acting like the people that we elected them to be. People who fix these problems, because that's what they do. They keep us safe. They change the world.
James, I know you wanted to comment, but Miran, I wanted to get from you on this issue of governance while we're on this topic. It's one of the areas you were concerned about. Do you have faith in world leaders? Do you believe your interests are being looked after?
Well, for me, the greatest issue is that politics needs to be sensitized, because we 6 live what everyday politicians discuss. When I was in Guildford, I had the opportunity of meeting this girl from West Bank and talking to her and understanding that, yes, what I see on CNN and BBC every day is what she's living. And that gave me an entire perspective. When it comes to looking forward to the future, I think idealism is very important. Because if we start getting disillusioned, we're going to turn up with low voter turnouts. We're going to see populations who lose the faith in politicians. I think we must have this kind of idealism, which I saw in the lawyers' movement in Pakistan, because so many people who previously had not cared about the Pakistan Supreme Court stood up for the Chief Justice, which they protested because they saw this person is not just a personality but a symbol of what we are affected by every day. So I think that we should really have faith in politicians and the future, because if we start turning our back down, then we cannot see the light ahead of the tunnel, which we need to grab and seize the opportunity and really bring change.
James?
To add on the importance of good governance, Charlie is really passionate about climate change, and I wasn't, too aware of it until last week when I met him. And I was in a session with Bill Clinton this morning, and he mentioned an interesting fact that if we reduce our emissions by 80% by 2050, it will still take 1,000 years for the Earth to cool. 1,000 years. That's ridiculous. So, on the note of good governance, as an international community, it's important to come together and tackle the issues facing the world head on.
Sabe, if I could ask you your thoughts on making a suggestion, offering some solutions on some of the issues that we've discussed here.
Well, if there's one thing I could change globally, I would wish that people just speak the truth. Because I'm sick and tired of sitting in front of the TV and just hearing something but not hearing everything. And I'm just done with hearing people giving solutions and talking about issues, but they're never just giving us the hardcore truth. I need someone to look me in the eyes and tell me exactly what is it that I can do and what is it that we have to act upon. Because right now I experience that there's a lot of under the carpet things that should be revealed.
Anyone inspired you? Has anyone in the political leadership ever made you think, okay, more people should be like this?
Well, I think the current president of Namibia, Mr. Hifikepunye Pohamba, on starting to eliminate corruption in Namibia, he really inspired me because he was pulling up the carpets and he was revealing the dirt under it. And it was really painful in the beginning. But I think now we're going on a process of healing, and I think it's so important, and I think it makes me being proud to be a Namibian citizen.
Sarah, who inspires you in the political leadership?
No one.
No one? Not even Barack Obama?
Not even, because I think Malawi in particular, we've been under colonialist power, we've had a dictator, we've had a corrupt government, and currently, well, we're giving him the benefit of the doubt. But the thing is, like Elsie was saying, I think there's a lot of things that are swept under the carpet, a lot of things that are not revealed. But what gets to me is that I'm on loan. That's how I pay my university fees. And there are certain situations that happened last year, whereby they government couldn't give us our loans because they had no money. And we, as youngsters, have to wonder, where is the money? So if I can't get a university education because someone is lining their pockets, I think that's very unfair. And I think a lot of bad governance is going on in the world. And the thing is, people don't realize that it hurts us as young people. Firstly, because you're setting an example for us as leaders. And unfortunately, we tend to follow what you do. And on top of that, we suffer because of bad governance.
Before I get back to Mary Robinson, you had your arm up for a second. Did you want to add something?
Well, when Mira was describing what might happen if we don't, say, change what our leaders look at, I was thinking she was talking about my country. Low voter turnout, disillusionment, not trusting the politicians. But on the question of who inspires me politically, I would agree with you that Barack Obama is inspiring. I mean, there's a lot of hype surrounding the man right now. But at the same time, he's managed to revitalize politics. He's managed to make my generation care about what goes on in Washington. He's managed to make all my friends who, when I talk politics because I love politics, they get bored. They actually talk back now. They have opinions. They are informed. And he's managed to, I mean, even though he hasn't done much in office yet, he's only been there a little while, give him a break, he's managed to revitalize almost an ethic of politics. Yeah.
Mary Robinson, when you hear the disillusionment young people have regarding the world leaders, what does that make you think? You're in that position.
Well, first of all, I think it's interesting because one of the issues that this Davos is considering is the problem of trust, the lack of trust. The element barometer has shown the trust of bankers, of corporations, even of the media, of politicians is at a very low ebb. But I'm concerned, and particularly concerned when I hear you, because young people need to be inspired. It's actually a very important part of finding more in yourself. And I'm glad that Obama is inspiring you and hopefully many other people in the United States. Let me just, in a way, make this personal. When I was invited to potentially join a group called the Elders, which Nelson Mandela was bringing together, because I'm Irish, I was quite sceptical. Who decides? This is a little bit. And when we came together with Nelson Mandela, and we sat at a round table with him 2 years ago now, and he just spoke very simply, and he told us to be humble. He told us, don't go to places with your ideas. Go to listen, and particularly listen to the most marginalized, and then, because it's relevant, particularly listen to young people. And I found myself charged with that kind of inspired responsibility. From then on, it wasn't a case of whether I was skeptical or not. No, it was a case of I'll do my best. And I think it's really important that young people find a context early enough in their lives to be inspired to do their best. And if we don't create a world where young people are inspired, that's another responsibility. If young people are so disillusioned, so, asking for the truth, you don't get perfect truth, but you are entitled to at least enough truth to create in you a trust. So, at this key time, what Obama said in his inauguration is very important. The world has changed and we must change with it. Yeah. And you young people must help to create an expectation of a better response. The world is very divided, very conflicted, ideologically divided, very uneven, very full of discrimination, and it is not people-centred. So I can understand that young people would look at this world and say, I'm not exactly excited. Maybe in the current financial crisis we can find the kind of vision that the drafters of the Universal Declaration found 60 years ago, when they said we need common values of a Universal Declaration of Human Rights. which includes all of the rights that matter, including the right to work, under Article 23, the right to work, the right to have non-discrimination, etc. If we can implement, we could change things.
No, I'm not looking for political commentary, but in terms of the way Barack Obama seems to have inspired so many people, not just in America, but around the world, to what extent could that set an example for other leaders? I mean, there seems to be a large amount of disillusionment in many parts of the world.
Well, I was in Saudi Arabia, as you were, for this conference on competitiveness, and I was actually in Jeddah when I heard Barack Obama's speech on reaching out to the Muslim world. And I was absolutely taken with how new and fresh it was. This was not business as usual. He was speaking to the world I was in, and they were listening. If we could have more of that, more truth-speaking, reaching out, saying, I am listening. I'm sending George Mitchell to listen, not to prescribe and dictate, because we are the great America. Much more of that, I think, would really be the voice that young people need to hear. But one leader is not enough. I mean, President Obama has a lot on his shoulders. He needs Europe. Where are the European leaders? He needs China. He needs India. He needs Brazil. He needs South Africa. He needs, the rest of the world to also be reaching out. That's the time we're in.
James, before I get to you, just a story. Someone told me that just before he left office, President Bush went on a trip to Africa and decided to go on a grassroots tour to try to raise some support and build his own morale, his own sort of morale. And he was going from village to village, and in one village, he stood there and he said, "America is your friend." And all the villagers rallied together and said, "Balunga." He said, "Oh, that sounds good. We will always give you supplies. We will always help you. Balunga." And everything he said there, Balunga, Balunga. So he thought, this is good. I have to find the next village and see if I can get this kind of response. And he said to the chief, "How do I get to the next village?" He said, "You see the buffalo there. You go through that. Just don't tread in the Balunga." James, what did you want to add?
That I agree that Barack Obama has been an inspiration. I was in Malawi when he was elected, the night he was elected, and there's, I think, a 6-hour time difference, and I stayed up to, watch him being elected state by state. It's how passionate I was about it. And I just think that, the majority of people who voted for Obama are young. We're the ones who are out there influencing change in the world. Just a thought. That's all.
Let me get from you. Oh, go ahead. Go on.
On the subject of who he can inspire worldwide, I was glad to hear that the Muslim world is listening to what Obama has to say. When I was in Guildford last week, I learned a few things about how Americans are thought of abroad. For one, I learned that because there's this perception that we all agree, that in some countries that we all agree with the president, and so if the president is disliked, we also are disliked. So I'm very glad that if this perception continues of that we Americans are unanimous, that we're united behind our president, even though it's not always the case, that we have a president who's willing to reach out to the world, to speak to world leaders, even those who may not like us very much, and willing to work with other countries to achieve diplomatic solutions to the world's problems rather than hard power military solutions. Because it's just very educational to learn that even though I am a Democrat, I didn't vote for Bush. Well, I couldn't vote for Bush. I was too young. But I didn't vote for McCain. I voted straight ticket Democrat. I'll reveal that. I still heard that Americans in general believe as Bush believes. And I think Obama will be very important, if that perception continues, in changing world opinion of all of us, of inspiring everyone to work not just with him, but work with Americans.
Yeah. Miram, was your hand up there to make a point? Yeah, go, please.
I'm just happy being from Pakistan that there's a president in the United States that doesn't say either you're with us or with the terrorists. Because belonging to a Muslim country, I often feel like going through JFK or Heathrow, that you are looked in a certain way as if you are a terrorist. And I believe that perception needs to stop. For someone like Obama, who's lived in Hawaii, who has been in Indonesia, to come and really with that diverse belief is really very hopeful, because I think the United States needs to change, because we cannot expect a superpower to continue behaving like this, because this has caused too much antagonism in the world today. So really, I'm hopeful that Barack Obama does, in fact, implement whatever he has said throughout his campaign and in these days that he's just been sworn in.
Talking of going through airports, I went through about 6 in the past 6 days, and remembered a story of one of my colleagues from Al Jazeera English, a very witty English guy actually, was saying how he was behind a a group of people going through security, and an elderly man, this was at the time of Richard Reeve, the shoe bomber. An elderly man walked through and the alarm went off, and the TSA fellow, the security guy, said, "Take your shoes off." So the old man was grumbling. He said, "Why do I have to take my shoes off?" And the fellow behind him said, "Well, ever since there's been a shoe bomber, you have to take your shoes off." So my colleague said, "Well, thank goodness they haven't had an underwear bomber yet." And he was pulled aside and told off. So I wish they would lighten up a little bit. Now, if I can get from all of you a thought, as we're getting to the last 10 minutes or so, Elsa, if I could start with you and get from you what you would like to come out of Davos. What kind of response would you like the people here, there are some key people here, to take back from what you and your colleagues have to say? Sorry, that's probably my not being away from the... Yeah, it wasn't that, it was, I think, the aerial. So what would you like the Davos community, these high-powered people to take away?
I would really appreciate it if they ask questions. Because when people ask me questions, I take it that they understand and they take it serious and they want to know more. And curiosity is for me a sign of interest in what I do. Yeah. And leaving Davos on Sunday, I guess I would have to meet a lot of people. I would want a lot of people that I know and that cares about what we are doing. Because being active in the community, feeling what the people feel, and being through those experiences with them, I think I have a lot to tell, and I have a lot of passion to give over to other people. So I would really like leaders to come up and say, "Look, tell me more because I'm interested."
James, are you going to Charlie, sorry, are you going to take a leaf out of James's book and get angry in the next couple of days?
No, I think that what we're doing at the moment is, and what we have done over the past generations, is built up this huge environmental debt. And it seems like the young generation are expected to pay it off, and I see that as a huge injustice, but also a huge opportunity, because now I think we can solve it. What I'd like to take out of the forum is I'd like everybody here to know that there are young people in communities all across the world who are a resource, who are people who are trying to facilitate change, and we'd like you to help us to help you. So, you know, that's what we're here to do, and please get in contact, please ask us to help you, and we really do want, we want the same thing, and we don't want to be fighting, we want to collaborate what we've got, and yeah, just help each other as much as we can.
Well done, good message. And Sarah, if you could see a headline at the end of the forum, something positive, what would you like to see? What message would you like to come out of this?
The young and older hand in hand working together, or something along those lines. I think it's very important for us to work together, not only to ensure that our future is wonderful, but also to make sure that we can get the best out of the present as young people and as older people working together. On a note, I'd also like to say, concerning the environmental issues, is that we really need to take this very seriously, because the ripple effects of environmental degradation they even affect HIV. If the crop doesn't grow in Malawi, the people who are HIV positive don't get food and they die. The financial crisis means that our donors will not be able to buy ARVs for the people who are HIV positive in Malawi, and they will die. We are dying. It's that serious, and we all need to work hand in hand to ensure that we survive.
That's true, isn't it, I guess, Miran, that everything is interlinked, ultimately. What would you like to see at the end? Yeah, they're saying that everything is interlinked, as Sarah has said. That, you know... Oh, you can't hear me. Sorry, I was saying that everything is interlinked, as Sarah was just indicating. You know, that climate change, AIDS, everything, financial crisis. What would you like, what kind of message would you like to come out of the forum? If it could be an ideal message, what would it be?
For me, I think that Davos needs to develop a conscience. I would want world leaders to know that when they speak of Namibia, they should know that El Sabe's stories should come through. I think when they see Charlie, climate change should come full front, and his campaign should also come to the forefront. I think when they speak of Sarah, they should know that her sister is HIV positive, and that this is something that is affecting all of us. I think even with James and Holmes, these stories should come in the front, because I believe that Davos is not a simply talk shop, because I think talking is very important. So for me, if someone goes back with our experiences and tries to put them somewhere along in the legislation, then that would be great.
We've talked about Barack Obama quite a bit this afternoon, so I think I'll end with something from him. He's fond of saying in his stump speeches, "This is our moment, this is our time." Good rhetoric, but also a good guideline for what I'd like to see happen. I would like to see at the end of this Davos the headline to be that world leaders are recommitted to the problems of the world, that they're not just sitting in a session and talking about them, that they're meeting, forming partnerships, and doing something about them. Now, not waiting until December for Copenhagen, not waiting for a few months or a few years to act on AIDS or education in Namibia, but acting now on the problems of the world.
All right, and James.
Last week, I met the most incredible people I've ever met in my life. Never have I met people so dedicated, so committed to the world that we live in. And we came up with a saying, I don't know why no one has said it yet, that
Waiting for you.
Young people, we are the powerful weapons of truth. But nonetheless, you shouldn't look at us as weapons, oh no, get rid of them. And we're not saying, oh, you guys are old, go to an old people's home. No, that's not what we're trying to do. My belief is that you can't alienate, or segregate anyone. The important thing is for us as young people and you guys as the older generation who have power to work together, because only together can we solve any crises, any issues that we face. And that's what I believe.
Well, Mary Robinson, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty inspired with what I've heard.
Yes, really, I think these 6 young people have been very good advocates for millions, for actually, in a number of countries, the majority of people in the country. When you come from sub-Saharan Africa or the Middle East, you are in countries where 50% of the population, at least, is under 25. So, it's a majority of the people in the country. And they have the potential, all of them, to be as articulate as these young people. I mean, listening, I'm convinced of one thing. You 6 have been changed by the experience you've had, and changed by being strengthened in your own good convictions. Young people are very responsive and very responsible when they get an opportunity. And that comes back to my plea, if you like, on behalf of the fact that we are entering this century where we're increasing the population so dramatically. We have to be very young. Young people have great strengths. They understand the technology much more than elders like myself. They understand perspectives on things. They have views that we've just heard. I would invite Davos to think about institutionalizing Davos 2010, having 25% of people under 30 here in Davos for a start, and going right down to the age that's represented here, not out of a sort of philanthropy or something, but actually because it's necessary, because we must listen, because young people have a lot to say. They have a perspective about the world, and they do want truth, and we need to build trust. So, it's been a privilege to be with you, and I would say to you, you've had some advantage of linking with other young people like you. Keep this in your minds. Be inspired, if not by elders, be inspired by your young contemporaries, and be strong, and keep going forward.
Well, Mary,
Because,
you're the elder in the group, metaphorically, if nothing else, so we're going to count on you to get that message across to those in Davos.
I think Davos would benefit, really.
I agree. Charlie, I think you had a quick final word here.
We just said that Guildford changed us. I think what it changed is it gave us a platform to bring our ambitions and our ideals and materialise them. I think there are young people all across the world who want to make changes like this. I went into a primary school and I gave a presentation on climate change, and at the end of it there were 60 kids and they all wrote a letter to UN Secretary General saying we should act on climate change, this is a massive issue. It's about bringing the information and giving people a chance to talk and giving people a chance to materialise their ideals. These people here, we're lucky enough to be here and talk to you. What I'd like you to do is give as many young people as you know the opportunity to talk to communities like this. Thank you.
The message now then, I moderate a lot of panels, but rarely could I say I've had 6 young, articulate people like this. Rarely have I had a group as articulate as this. So please, a big round of thank you to all of them. And Mary Robinson. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up. Thank you very much for taking part, and listen out for the young voices.